Hello, it's Scott Manley here. Thanksgiving is over. If you can believe it, I'm back from Boston with a big batch of deep space updates. Once again, starting with the rocket launches in the past couple of weeks. On the 15th of November, China launched a Long March 7 carrying Tianzhou 8 to the Tiangong space station. And it carries, of course, a bunch of supplies for the crew. It's also carrying a couple of satellites called NASat 4A and B. The cargo also includes an interesting science experiment in the form of some bricks made out of lunar regolith simulant. And the idea is they're going to take these bricks that were made on Earth and put them on the outside of the space station and see how they last over the next few years before they're returned to Earth for analysis. Obviously looking at how you build structures on the moon. Then we have, in quick succession, 3 launches by SpaceX, starting on the 17th of November with a Falcon 9 from Launch Complex 39A in Florida. This was an Optus X GEO communications satellite, so it's by Australian owners, built by Northrop Grumman, and it's going to 87.75 degrees east. The manufacturer and owner are very secretive about what this satellite is actually going to do, but observers think that the X might be some indication that it's going to have an X-band payload like previous Optus defense satellites. 18th of November, there was a Falcon 9 launching out of Vandenberg Space Force Base carrying 20 Starlink satellites into Group 9-12. Soon after, there was another Falcon 9 launching from the East Coast from Slick 40, and this one was carrying a satellite originally developed by India, GSAT-20. This is a geosynchronous communication satellite that's supposed to provide television and everything else. Now, this was actually originally supposed to launch on the LVM-3 launch vehicle, but then they shifted it over to the Falcon 9 because, well, it's easier to buy a Falcon 9 launch because of mass issues. But yeah, that was interesting, moving from one launch vehicle to another. And yeah, I said 3 launches by SpaceX. Well, that's my Spanish Inquisition counting, because there were 4 launches. Over in Boca Chica, Texas, Starship and Super Heavy ascended into the sky on IFT-6. The sick test flight, which in some ways took a small step backwards in terms of booster recovery, and in other ways it took a great step forward in showing us awesome footage of Starship landing in the Indian Ocean. So yes, I have a video that already discusses this, but since then there has been a few more bits of footage and stuff released that we should mention. First of all, yeah, we got amazing footage from the Boycam in the middle of the Indian Ocean, showing the flip and burn in higher resolution. And one thing that's sort of obvious is that during the flip and burn, it loses a whole lot of tiles. And that, to me, says that the structure was flexing too much. Possibly because it was maybe weakened. The flexing, the line of tiles was lost just above where the propellant tanks are. So that might have got hotter. I'm not sure, but it's definitely an interesting thing. Some of the tiles have, of course, been brought back to Australia. That's near where it landed. The Starship broke after it landed, roughly along the line of where the propellant tank ends and the upper structure begins. So anyway, some of that stuff's been brought back. On the booster recovery, yes, so Elon's official word came, well, again, attached to another Diablo video. He said that they lost comms to the launch tower computer and the catch could have worked, but they weren't sure, so they erred on the side of caution, which is, great. But of course, this failure, this mistake, while it was epic, yes, they did have some, big people in attendance, such as, Trump. And more interestingly, they had a guy, the General Chance Salzman, who is like part of space operations at Space Force. So Space Force is officially getting interested in Starship for, low orbit capabilities. Another interesting thing that came out, well, so after the booster landed, yes, we all know that it fell over and remained floating in the Gulf. We've since had confirmation that people were on hand to basically poke a bunch of holes in it, probably using guns, and there's actually some footage of the booster sinking beneath the waves, getting crushed as water flows in, and bottoming out. It seems that the depth of the water wasn't quite enough for the booster to sit vertically, so I presume they have since pulled that onto its side, so it's not a danger to shipping. Finally, we got some photographs from the International Space Station from Don Pettit, who's up there. He got some great high-quality footage. But there's also a video from SEN who used their high-resolution 4K camera on the front of the station. And you can see it as it comes over Mexico, the plume is ascending through the skies over the Gulf. Very cool to see that. Okay, moving on with the rest of the launches this week. First of all, 21st of November, we had a Soyuz 2.1A from Baikonur carrying Progress MS-29 to the International Space Station. This would otherwise be another ferry flight, which nobody talked about, except that as they opened the hatch, they smelt something really bad and closed the hatch and decided to run a little longer on the atmosphere scrubbing. Now, Don Pettit says that it smelled like paint, but other sources say that this could be propellant that was leaking. So the Progress is designed to be able to transfer propellant to the International Space Station, and that means there's like these propellant lines on the docking ring. And if those are supposed to be purged before docking to make sure that there's nothing that gets into there, but if that doesn't happen, yeah, you could have some nasty hypergolics in there. Problem with this is that the smell of paint is not consistent with the smell of nitrogen tetroxide and, hydrazine. So I'm not sure if we'll find out what's going on there, but it seems to be working fine now. 21st of November, we had a Falcon 9 launching Starlink from Slick 40, 24 satellites from Group 666. Yes, that's the 400th Falcon 9 launch, and the conspiracy theorists will no doubt go wild with that launch number. 24th of November from Vandenberg Space Force Base, we saw a Falcon 9 carrying 20 Starlink into Group 9-23. That was the 100th launch of a Falcon 9 from Vandenberg, and yet somehow this launch stream started after the rocket was flying. That was interesting. 24th of November, a Long March 2C out of Jichuan launched a pair of satellites called Siwi Gaojing. It was 2.3 and 2.4. These are also known as SuperView Neo. So these are obviously Earth observation satellites. They're going to sun-synchronous orbit. 25th of November, Electron launched from Mahia with a mission called ICE. ICE, baby. That was 5 satellites for Kinéis. That's again an Internet of Things constellation going into low Earth orbit. This is the 3rd of 5 launches for this company. 25th of November had the Falcon 9 launching Starlink 23 satellites for Group 12. That's a new shell, a new group in the Starlink constellation. 27th of November. Juche 2E by Landspace launched out of Jichuan, carrying a satellite called Guangshuan 2 and 1 and 2. That's a low Earth orbit communication satellite. More interesting than the payload is the fact that Juche 2E has an upgraded second stage from the previous version. Now it has a common bulkhead tank structure, and it has a new engine called the TQ-15A. So this is a liquid oxygen methane engine now it has thrust vectoring capabilities. Previously, they had another engine which had a fixed nozzle, and then they had a pair of Vernier engines for steering. So now they have different steering on the second stage. 27th of November, Falcon 9 launching 24 Starlink Group 6-76 out of Florida. Launch Complex 39A this time. 29th of November, there was a Soyuz 2.1A frigate from Vostochny launching a Condor FKA military reconnaissance satellite. Very few details on that. Then there was a Falcon 9 launching 24 Starlinks from Slick 40, Group 6-65. And 30th of November also saw a Starshield launch out of Vandenberg, where the live stream was delayed until after the vehicle was taken off. The fact that this happened twice leads me to believe that they are hiding something on the surface at Vandenberg. It could well be that they're working on some launch site nearby. Another company has stuff in shot that they don't want to see. I'm not sure, but it's definitely, it's telling that this has happened twice. So yeah, this is a Starshield constellation, not a lot of details about what's actually going on. Supposedly a secret number of Starshield satellites, but SpaceX did actually say they launched 20 Starlink, so that does limit the number of things that could have been on there that weren't Starlink. And finally, 30th of November, Long March 12, debut launch for the Long March 12 out of Wangchang Commercial Launch Complex. So this is this is basically Chinese Falcon 9 lookalike. It's 3.8 meters wide, very similar to what the Falcon 9 has. It's 6.2 meters tall, 510 tons of thrust from the 4YF-100 engines on the first stage. Runs on RP1 and liquid oxygen. It's about 430 tons of mass at launch, and without any recovery, because it doesn't have that right now, it can put 12 tons into low Earth orbit. So this makes it broadly similar to the original Falcon 9 1.0. Now, they have said that later versions of this may become reusable, but as of right now, with 4 engines on that first stage, they're not going to be able to do a landing with those. It is apparently part of the plans to switch it over to 7 or even 9 engines later on and stretch it and make it more capable in landing. By the way, payloads were Huawang, Jishuxian, Weiqing, and Jishuxian, Weiqing 3. So I've no idea what those are, but I'm more interested in the fact that China has another Long March rocket. So yeah, suborbital launches of note in the last few weeks. Just before Rocket Lab launched Ice Baby, they launched another secret HASTE mission, a hypersonic test mission out of Wallops. This is apparently for LiDAR. There was no live stream, no real acknowledgement that it existed, but people on the ground knew it happened. But it all happened within 24 hours of their other launch, so that's a cool thing for Rocket Lab to do. And in Texas, New Shepard 28 launched with some repeat customers, Sharon and Mark Hagel, going on their second flight after NS-20. It also had Emily Candarelli, who is known as the Space Gal. She's sort of online, used to make YouTube videos and things like that. There's some other people. Austin Littoral apparently won his seat in some sort of giveaway, and James Russell and Hank Wolfond. Okay. But there's another suborbital launch which I missed, which I want to mention, is back in October 20th, the University of Southern California Rocket Propulsion Lab. They smashed the record for the student rocket team altitude for a solid rocket. 470,000 feet, that is 143 kilometers. It's Aftershock 2 was their launch vehicle, and they launched it from the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. And the sort of big problem that they spent a lot of time solving was keeping the thing from breaking up at hypersonic speeds in the lower atmosphere. They had new fancy thermal protection paint and titanium coated fins, but yeah, they absolutely smashed the record, and we got some cool footage from that. Okay, so back in September, and so another story that came from a few months ago was China launched a spacecraft called Xi'an-19 back in September, and they flew around the world for a couple of weeks and then landed. Well, apparently one of the things it was doing up there was testing an inflatable habitat hardware. And yeah, they got some footage of that showing that it actually worked. China's obviously interested in being able to build bigger modules on smaller rockets. NASA's done this with the Beam module, and we're likely going to see this in some of the commercial space station destinations. Okay, the last few weeks have seen a bunch of lunar stories. So first of all, Lunar Outpost, they're one of the sort of finalists for the NASA lunar rover for Artemis 5. They announced that they are going to fly it on Starship, which is an interesting way to deliver it, because of course, while Starship is supposed to carry Artemis 3 to the surface of the moon, the rover isn't needed until Artemis 5. So it leads us to a question. If this is selected, does this mean they're going to fly another Starship flight to the surface of the moon? Or do they just think they're going to have the rover ready to have it go along on Artemis 3, which, as we know, Artemis 3 could well still be delayed further given the way things are going. It's not guaranteed that they will be the winner. There's still, a couple of other finalists in there. But Lunar Outpost is a team that's made of Leidos and MDA Space, Goodyear, General Motors. So that's an interesting data point. But NASA also announced its own lunar surface cargo contracts. They're going to deliver the Japanese rover on a Starship, and that'll be no earlier than 2032. That's like a pressurized rover, way more ambitious than what we've got here, what I was talking about with the Lunar Outpost. Also, Blue Moon will deliver a lunar surface habitat no sooner than 2023. Interesting decisions there. Firefly also announced in November 25th, it's going to launch its Blue Ghost lander to the moon during a 6-day window in January of 2025. And that means it's going to launch on a Falcon 9. Now, it's going to take 45 days to get to the moon, then it's going to spend a couple of weeks there doing stuff on the moon, assuming it gets there. Now, that does mean that all the potential Q4 2024 missions that were going to go to the moon by commercial landers aren't happening. So there was iSpace, which was expecting to launch. It sounds like they are going to launch also in January on a Falcon 9. And there's Intuitive Machines who are going to launch their second flight. That's now pushed back to February, although because it launches on a faster trajectory, it could actually still technically beat Blue Ghost to the moon, depending upon how things go. Anyway, that's a little fascinating stuff going on there. In Florida, Blue Origin have been showing off their New Glenn launch vehicle, bringing it fully vertical on the launch pad, this time in what looks like a fully flight-ready configuration with all of the engines on the first stage. Now, before they launch, they are no doubt going to have to perform a whole bunch of tests. There's going to be wet dress rehearsals, there's probably going to be test fires on the pad. They're going to have to exercise the launch team, make sure that everything is ready before they go for the actual launch. And we're not sure if this is going to be before the end of the year. I think that time is getting short, and Blue Origin aren't exactly famous for getting ahead of their launch schedule. But all the same, I hope that it's successful. I'm looking forward to this happening. Italy is planning on reopening the Luigi Broglio launch site, which is just off the coast of Kenya. So back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Italy had the San Marco oil platform off the coast, which would be used to launch Scout rockets. Now, since then, they shut it down, but they still had like a satellite tracking station. It sounds like they're going to reactivate the launch capabilities. And while they haven't said what launch vehicles they are going to use, Italy is the main people behind the Vega C launch vehicle, so it's highly likely we could see Vega Cs launching off the coast of Africa soon. Dawn Aerospace are still playing around with their little Mark II Aurora rocket-powered space plane. They're now talking more about hypersonics, but the idea of space launch vehicle is probably still in there. They took off on the runway, went vertical, well, 85 degrees, and they hit Mach 1.1 in their little rocket plane, supersonic for the first time, and they hit 82,500 feet. They also set a record for a zoom climb in an aircraft. It reached 66,000 feet in 118.6 seconds, which is apparently beating a 50-year-old record. So yeah, they're still potentially talking about spaceflight, but yeah, it's still cool to see rocket planes flying around. NASA's Dragonfly mission is one I've been paying attention to. It is a nuclear-powered octocopter, quadcopter, that's going to fly to Titan and fly around the atmosphere. Instead of being a rover, it's going to be a drone that flies around. So they have now selected their launch provider. It's going to be SpaceX on the Falcon Heavy. This is going to be the third big high-profile NASA mission to fly on Falcon Heavy. $256.6 million was the price tag, and the date is going to be July of 2028. And once again, this illustrates that with this great launch cadence and the high success rate of Falcon Heavy, NASA are comfortable putting these really high-profile missions where failure would be terrible onto their, the SpaceX's launch vehicle. Vulcan was considered, but it's probably more expensive, unfortunately, and it's unlikely to have the same level of launch reliability baked in by the time it flies. Still, I'm hoping that we do start to see some more diversity on launches going forwards. It's also notable, by the way, that this is going to be the first mission to fly on a Falcon Heavy, which is carrying an RTG, a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. So SpaceX is now NASA is okay with SpaceX flying these payloads that contain these highly expensive radioactive power generators. SpaceX are also very happy that they are now getting limited approval to operate their cell phone service direct from satellite. So FCC has given them the go-ahead with a lot of restrictions to make sure that they don't interfere with terrestrial providers and other providers which may be on similar frequencies. But that should enable some texting to go forward. Now, they're not being permitted to use the higher power settings, which means they won't be able to offer real-time voice or high data rates. But even any data rate is good. It's nice to be able to send text messages via satellite. I'm sure iPhone users that have used that will understand why it's great. Finally, Bepi Colombo took another swing by Mercury in the last few hours. Another gravity assist to slow it down and help it get down to Mercury's orbit so it can go into orbit. We got some pictures from it. They're not great. They're engineering camera images because the really cool scientific gear is hidden behind the propulsion stage that's being used to bring it down into orbit. Can't wait to see the real images once this thing actually gets into proper orbit, but that's some time out from now. So yeah, that's the news. In the next few days, one thing to watch for is Vega C, which is returning to flight after its failure in 2022 and a whole bunch of other interesting problems in the meantime. So yeah, that's one to watch. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.